Awesome. I am grateful that Doug Fergeson's here with us. I had the opportunity to go to his school. Um, let's see, when was it? It was back in November. It seems like it was yesterday, but sometimes it seems like it was last year, which it was last year. So
Was last year.
it was. We're 2024. By golly. I've heard a lot about Doug Ferguson's school. I've got a mastermind group that we've been a part of, and they just kept telling me about it, like, go to Doug's school, go to Doug's school. And I'm like, well, I've been to marketing schools before, and I know it works, but Doug, man, where were you? Where were you back in 2007? 2007, the cattle market was somewhat volatile. Everything was volatile then. I was drilled into me, you have to replace your inventory. You make money on the replacement of your inventory. So I had several loads of yearlings that we sold. We replaced our inventory the same day we sold them. So I was doing everything by the book. I sold them on the video. I bought calves back on the video. Problem was feed prices were super high. I thought, well, I'm going to ship them to Nebraska where the market's better and the feed's cheaper. Then I added freight onto it. They didn't gain. And I just kept pouring money into these calves, and it was one bad decision after another. And I got burned. I didn't have somebody there. And really, I did. I just didn't reach out to the people who are on my team. Sometimes when you're in that and the walls are closing in, you don't see the people that are right there ready to help you. And looking back, I know two people that I could have called and they would have talked me through it, talked me off the cliff. But it's taken a long time. I mean, that's been years ago. A mentor of mine said last year, the IRS doesn't even go back that far, Jared, if you did file bankruptcy, and you're still carrying this burden of a loss of 15 years ago. So I bring that up not because the principles don't work, but because Doug talks a lot about the mindset in his first day of his class. And that is kind of the piece that I didn't have, was to help me to realize that, okay, the bad decision doesn't mean you're a bad person. A failure doesn't mean you're a failure. And so I appreciate his approach to that. They work on the mindset first and the tactics second. So with that, Doug Fergeson's going to teach us about sell by marketing and more than that. Doug and I had a conversation, did a little live video last week, and we talked about how this cattle market's changing, this whole economy is changing. We don't have the collective, maybe we have the collective knowledge. Individually, we don't have the knowledge to look back and see what happened during the last significant crisis that we faced, which would have been probably World War II and the Great Depression. Most of those people that lived through that aren't here with us or not able to share that with us. And so we're kind of going into uncharted territories. Yes, there are cycles in history that repeat themselves, but I think this is somewhat unknown. With that said, we have the power and the ability to make choices. One of those choices is when we sell and when we buy and how we replace our inventory. And so in a very volatile market, it seems to me like, from what I understand, that sell by marketing is a key component to being profitable every year, which being profitable every year is a key component to having a legacy business and being generational. So with that, Doug, tell us what we're going to learn here today, and we'll jump right in.
That you offer a lot of trust in me, Jared, to make me co-host and let me run the screen. That's
Well,
something else. So
we there is a lot of trust there, because I've been through your class and there's nothing that you taught that I wouldn't endorse. There you are. Yep, now we can see just your slide.
you're pushing me into unfamiliar territory with all this technology. It's all kind of new to me. So um I want to say a couple things right up front, just kind of for point of reference. I live in southeast Nebraska, just right off the Kansas line. And so, like, anytime I make a reference to the cattle market, that's what I'm going to be referring to, is kind of like Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri are a lot of markets that I pay attention to, and we've all been pretty heavily affected by the drought. I think a lot of places have been. In fact, Jared, speaking of the weather, real quick, little rabbit trail. I heard on radio the other day that Arizona is the only state that is not in some weather-related emergency. So maybe Alan Crockett knows something we don't. He's living right and the rest of us aren't. Just kind of wanted to throw that one out there. But another thing I'm going to mention for those of you that are kind of familiar with what I talk about, what I write, what I teach, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach for this presentation. Jared and I have kind of discussed a book written by Napoleon Hill titled Outwitting the Devil. And Napoleon Hill wrote the book Think and Grow Rich, where, he interviewed a lot of successful people. But in the book Outwitting the Devil, what was it, Jared? He interviewed like 2,500 people that society would consider failures. And I'm not going to say these people that I've been talking to are failures, but they're going through a hard time. And I've spent a lot of time on the phone probably in the last 3 days. In fact, 2023 would be marked as the year, but especially in the last 3 months, I've been talking to a lot of people that are struggling or are going or have gone out of business. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. I'm going to kind of focus maybe a little bit more on cost. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move into it. Conventional wisdom, we've all heard certain things. One of them is the heavier the calf, the bigger the paycheck. And, you look at Ogallala's sale last week, they had 497-pound steers brought $50 ahead more than 520-pound steers. So right there, I mean, that blows that all to pieces. But this is what I find interesting. In 2022, our expenses went up by about 13 to 30%, depending on what input you were talking about. But yet cattle businesses survived that year. Now here we are in the year 2023, 5-weight cattle are up 39%, 8-weights are up 20% on the heifers, 27% on the steers, fats are up 13%. And I'm basing that off of Nebraska market comparing the first week of January 2023 to the first week of January of 24. But this is the point that people are going out of business. And there's been some other presenters kind of talked about this, Chris Miles, he kind of hinted on it a little bit. I've heard a few others, but, just because the value of your assets is going up doesn't mean that you're profitable. And years ago, I kind of got into a heated discussion with somebody else about the definition of profitable, and that's what their definition was. Your net worth goes up. And my definition of profitable was you're positively cash flowing. And, I guess this is kind of one of those arguments that after time went by, I guess I won that one. So if we're going to be in business, it is our job to deploy money. We are capital allocators. So we need to detach ourselves from expenses and just view them as plain numbers on a spreadsheet. Now, here's what I mean by detaching yourself. And I talk about this in my marketing schools, is the word rationalizing. And rationalizing is just rationalized to our mind, to ourselves, and then we can justify something. So, boy, we could really use that portable corral, and maybe you could get by with the portable panels that you already have. Just it's going to take a little bit more work. But that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Right now, 20 below zero here is what it's been. And, I can see a lot of guys justifying spending money for convenience because, we go through this little cold snap that comes around once in a while. But I consider myself to be a laissez-faire free market capitalist. So I don't have any problem with spending money, but we have to earn that money back. And, so that's where I have that bullet point down there. Spend money on purpose with a purpose. And both of these two bullet points are going to kind of be like an underlying theme throughout the rest of these slides. Now, in some of these conversations I've had with people, there's this thing called the debt to income ratio. And basically, it's your debt payments divided by your gross income. And all this tells us is, can I afford the payments? And a lot of people will look at that, and as long as they can afford payments, they go ahead and roll with it. And I kind of tend to think this is the wrong question to ask. In fact, in one of the conversations I had with one of these young producers, he asked how I started and how I began. And I'm really kind of glad he brought that up and jogged my memory because I look at things a lot different. I will look at something, I do an analysis, and I'm going to look at the cash flow. But back when I was in my early 20s and I was starting to buy cattle, I asked a completely different question, and that was, can I afford this? If I spend this money, and for example, so when I started building the pens that I have now, there were a lot of times I'd start building the pen and then couldn't finish it for a while, even though I only needed 60 more yards of fence. But if I would have went and bought that pipe and that sucker rod and finished that, and then something happened, I didn't have the cash. And that was the thing. At that time, I was paying cash for everything because, I was too scared to borrow money, and, I hadn't built up the confidence yet. And of course, now I've got the experience behind me. I have that confidence. So I look at cash flow. So that's where I think we need to ask ourselves better questions. Can you afford this when the business climate changes? So I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare this with the storm that we got hit with. So I'm going to kind of try to do some of this math in my head on the fly. But if you had a 400 head cow calf operation, and based off kind of current cattle market conditions in Nebraska, you sell some cull cows, keep some heifers, and then you sell the rest of the calves, you're going to do roughly $500,000 in gross sales. So if you got a $90,000 debt payment and it costs you $900 a year to keep a cow, you're still probably going to make somewhere $75,000, 50,000, somewhere in there after you make the payment. If the cost to keep the cows goes up to $100 a month after you make the debt payment, you're only making maybe 15,000 a year. And just like in that first slide, I said that the cattle prices in Nebraska are up 30%. That old Gordon Hazard quote, you can't throw a stone so high that it won't come down. These feeder calf markets, what happens if they come down 20% and you still got that payment? But we all know that our costs don't come down as quickly as the price of cattle. So you would be screwed. That would be several scenarios where the business climate could change on you. And then what's your savings ratio? Just like when I was talking about if the cost to keep a cow changed, that's going to affect your savings ratio. In my classes, I talk about that 98-cent spring that'll break loose and float around inside the valve housing of your tractor and cost you about 10 grand. With the storm we had this last weekend, I got the price what a new door on a 7210 John Deere cost. And I'll tell you, just firsthand experience, doesn't matter how good your heater works, it's not good enough without that door. So having a savings ratio for things like that. And then the next bullet point on here, am I a pass-through business? And this is where money comes in one hand and it goes right out the other. And it works as long as that dollar doesn't slip through your fingers. And that's what's kind of happened to some people. And then what's my return rate? And, you just kind of mentioned ranching for profit, and they're going to talk about return on assets, not just return on investment only. Now, one thing I do want to say in all fairness, when it comes to this debt to income ratio, one of the reasons I included this and started off with it, there were two kinds of people when in these phone calls that I've had. And some of them were young guys that started out and just borrowed too much money. And now it kind of finally caught up to them. And the other thing that really kind of surprised me was this younger generation, whatever we call them, Gen Zs or whatever now. I'm no longer the younger generation anymore. There's guys younger than me coming on. But they actually tried to take on mom and dad's business. And mom and dad are getting older, and the banker looks across the desk and he sees a couple that, hey, they're getting older and the likelihood that they're not going to pay this back is going down. So the banker yanked the chain on. And these young guys stepped in and mom and dad are like, fine, if you want to try to take this over, have at it. Good luck. Um, a lot of those guys that I talk to, they're not really disheartened, but boy, they have all talked about, the price of paying tuition and the lessons that they've learned. And so that's kind of why I led with this debt to income ratio. Now there's a double-edged sword, and we've all talked about compounding. Chris kind of hinted about it earlier in his presentation. And I'm talking about operating expenses and interest rates. And anybody you talk to, I mean, operating expenses are going up. My insurance rates on my business gone up 5.7% this year, and I didn't buy anything new. It's not like I added some pricey piece of equipment or anything like that. Trying to think of some other ones. I get my corn, I take my corn into a feed mill, they roll it, they deliver it back to the place for me just because I do have my own roller mill, but it takes so long to roll my own. But they used to charge me 40 cents a bushel for roll, storage, and delivery. And now they're charging me 70 cents just for roll and delivery, and storage is separate. So right there, everything's gone up in the state of Nebraska. We got notice that our electrical rates are going to go up quite a bit this year. So then if you're borrowing money on a regular basis to cover your operating expenses, you also know that interest rates are going up. So it's almost like we're having that compounding effect going the wrong way. It's costing you more to run the business, and then it's costing you more to finance that if you're borrowing money. So I've kind of been trying to steer people into a different direction. I would really like to see it if we could get to the point where we can cash flow the business and not borrow money for operating expenses. Like, Chris kind of, he threw just maybe a little bit of shade on Dave Ramsey, but this is kind of one of those points where I think the debt snowball would definitely work. And, it's one of those deals. I don't have anything, I should probably say this. I don't have anything against borrowing money, but it's a discipline thing. And that's the one thing I think Dave Ramsey does well is with that debt snowball, we're trying to change that behavior. So trying to not borrow money for the operating expenses and tone down the interest rates a little bit. And then run your numbers. And I should probably mention this too. I always got to give people credit for the things that they do. And some of these slides and these graphics aren't mine. I think it'll be pretty easy to tell which ones are mine. I stole a lot of these off of Google. But run your numbers. And this is based off a conversation I had with another operator that runs a backgrounding yard similar to mine. And he had a lot of money borrowed to finance cattle, and his interest payments are huge. And he was wondering about liquidating the cattle and getting rid of the interest payments and possibly letting some of these pens sit empty. Well, when you grow your business, a lot of your other expenses grow with it. And he had these really high overheads. And if he would liquidate those cattle, those overheads are still there. And so now he has fewer head of cattle to allocate those overheads across. That rise in those overhead expenses would affect his cost of gain more than the interest payments would. So, while we're on the phone, we kind of start talking. And I was like, well, what if you started custom feeding some cattle for other people, and then you could allocate some of those overheads over those, kind of like what Chris talked about earlier at the rental property. You bring in a renter and have him pay the mortgage payment for you. And, full disclosure, I think the best way to make money on cattle is to own them, but there are other options out there. That's not lost on me. And, so we had that discussion, and this kind of comes to the know and understand yourself. He didn't like that idea because then he looked at it as he would be an employee on his own place. And he was also worried that, the customer will pay the feed bill until the last month before they send the cattle, and they won't pay that feed bill if they don't plan on sending you another group of cattle. So, I mean, those are all things that you know, we need to think about these kind of things, weigh them out, figure out what our comfort zone is, what we're comfortable with. So I feel like that was it was a productive conversation that I had with him. And there's plenty of other scenarios, but that's just kind of one example. And then commissions. And my point in this slide is there can be little expenses that sneak up on us that maybe we're not paying attention to. And there was a guy that went through the marketing school. He called me one day. He had a couple questions, and I thought his expenses were a little high, so I questioned him on it. And one of them that caught my attention was what the sale barn charged him, and what they took out, how to phrase it correctly, what they charged him to sell his cattle per head. That's the reference that we were using. And I asked him, I said, what was that sale barn doing that was so special for you? You know, because every time I sell a group of cattle, it just costs me X amount of dollars per head. And then I thought about it, and I'm like, every time I sell cattle, doesn't matter if I sell a gooseneck load or a pot load. Now, when I send pot loads, I have the truckers turn in a ticket, so the freight comes out of my check and the sale barn pays the driver. But when I take a gooseneck load in there, of course, I'm not turning in a freight ticket, but it costs me the same every time I sell cattle there. And what I came to realize is that that sale barn is charging me a lower commission rate when I sell load lots versus when I sell the smaller bunches. And I'd never paid attention to that before or caught that before. And then special sales. Um, the first time that I sold cows on a bred female special, I got to find out why they are called special. Because I know what it costs to preg check a feeder heifer on the weekly auction. When you take cows into a bred cow special, the preg check cost is a lot higher. And of course, you know, I know what it cost if you overnighted cattle and they fed them, and the hay was really expensive for that special sale. So understanding what some of those costs are right up front, I kind of got surprised by that. So don't be afraid to ask what some of these things are going to cost you, so that way you don't get caught off guard. And then high risk cattle. Now, we all love high risk cattle, and the reason we love them is because they're a good buy. Now, in both of these pictures, these are cattle that I bought just this fall, delivered out of Tennessee. In fact, just about everything I have on the yard, except for one load, all originated out of Tennessee this year. And the reason that I bought all these cattle from Tennessee was I could get them delivered. So that's paying the commission and the freight. I could get them delivered to my chute $25,000 a load cheaper than I could buy those cattle here. And that makes that a very attractive buy. Now, here's the thing. Those cattle have earned their reputation for a reason. And, you know, we've all heard those stories about Southern cattle and the high death loss. And, you know, I'm not going to throw shade on Southern cattle because they AI to the same bulls that the rest of us do. There are some very good quality cattle down there, but some of those train wreck stories are true. I've had a few of them happen to me. If you buy enough cattle, you're going to get the pen from hell. I mean, it's just a given fact. It's a Murphy's Law type thing. But can you handle these kind of cattle? And if you cannot, you should not buy them. And you know, you got Don Notto going to be on here in a couple of days, I think, if I remember the schedule right. And I don't know if she's going to talk about that, but you got to have the stockmanship skills to handle these kinds of cattle. And as big of a fan as I am in the stockmanship, and I will always throw the testimony out there that, you know, those stockmanship schools did wonders for me. You also need to understand animal health. And when you're dealing with these kinds of cattle, it is not the kind of stockmanship of, oh, let's handle them quietly and we'll put them through this gate nice and pretty and drive them in a straight line. It is taking the stress off of these animals, getting them started the right way, and looking at it from an animal health standpoint, which a lot of times I think that is kind of lost in some of these schools. So I don't want anybody to have the false sense that because you watched a video or you went to school, you're capable of handling these cattle fresh out of one of those schools. There's a learning curve to it. Um, Another thing would be drought cows. We look at cows that are in a droughted out area, and I know one rancher personally, he did this, he got greedy, and every week cows in that area got cheaper. And they got cheaper this week. I can't buy them this week. They'll get cheaper next week. And then next week they got cheaper. So he's like, well, I can't buy them this week. They'll get cheaper next week. By the time he finally pulled the trigger and he bought some, those cows were so stressed out that when they got them delivered to where they were going, the death loss on those cows was terribly, terribly high. Now, here's the thing to consider with cattle prices being as high as they are, we burn through capital pretty quickly buying these cattle. I mean, I would much rather buy cattle at $1.30 than $3.30, just for the simple fact when one dies, you don't have as much cost, with that dead one. And that's the deal. Even though I just said I could get these Tennessee cattle $25,000 a load cheaper, they're still expensive when one dies. And then when you have one die, you have to spread his cost out across the survivors. And if you start having too many of them die, your cost will get out of control in a hurry, even though we bought these cattle cheap. So that's one thing to kind of be aware of. Even though high risk cattle are cheap and they look like a good buy, they may not be if you can't handle them. Now, on this slide, don't get hung up on all these numbers and all this and that over here. My point is our cost of living is going up. And, if you're like me in my household, I don't do the grocery shopping. My wife does. And, she's kind of been talking about the price of groceries going up. In fact, I know after kind of looking over the household budget, at the end of December, we were spending 17% more for groceries and household goods than we were a year ago. And, you know, there just isn't a whole lot we're going to be able to do about a lot of this. In fact, just yesterday morning, she made French toast and she puts the little loaves of bread or the slices of bread down on her skillet. And she's like, 4 pieces used to cover that frying pan of hers, and now they don't. So we're seeing shrinkflation happen, even in the portion sizes of our groceries. And I've got a picture of my daughter playing basketball. And those of you that have followed me or known me for a while, Rosalind plays a lot of basketball on multiple teams. Just last summer, she played more basketball games outside of the state of Nebraska than she did inside the state of Nebraska. So our cost of living's getting a little bit more expensive just for that. And I don't know if Alan Crockett is going to talk about this when he comes on or not, but we tend to start the business and then we build our lifestyle around the business. And I think that's kind of the wrong way of going about things. And this is the reason Jared hosts these summits is we need to learn to run the business to subsidize the lifestyle. And with these cost of living going up, I just feel like it's going to be really, really hard to reduce our overhead cost if we're including labor as one of those overhead costs. And in my schools, I always preach, I shouldn't say always, but I've started preaching really strongly to include your salary in that overhead cost and keep the farm money and the ranch money separate. And the reason being is if we run the business well enough to cover our salary, home base is covered. And as long as we have home base covered, we remain calm. And when we remain calm, we stay in a good headspace, we make good decisions. So maybe the business isn't making a profit. Maybe it's just running break even, but home base is covered. So we stay calm, we make good decisions. The moment that home base isn't covered, that's when we start making erratic emotional decisions. And then we start making decisions based on emotions that maybe we shouldn't be. So kind of understanding the cost of living and overheads and how all that plays in. And then I'm going to take a little time. I'm going to talk about this slide a little bit. And okay, I'm doing good on time so far. So I'm going to compare heifers And when I'm talking about flipping or flopping these heifers, I'm talking about bred heifers. And I'm going to compare it to flipping houses. So I thought that was really interesting when Chris made that reference to buying a rental property in Tennessee earlier. But if you're going to buy a rental house or even a house that you're going to flip, the market has already dictated what it will pay for a house of so many square feet in certain condition on that block. And so if you go into a neighborhood where houses are selling for $90,000 and you buy one for 60 and then you renovate it and fix it up, and you went with the tile floors and marble countertops and the fancy light fixtures, and you had your electrician go out of the way to hide the electrical outlets up underneath the custom made cover, so that way your walls and backsplashes have this really neat clean look. You overbuilt the neighborhood. Now you got $130,000 house on a $90,000 block, and you're not going to sell it. And that's exactly what we do with these bred heifers. We buy the fanciest ones that come out of the reputation herds, and then we have this big checklist of things. Here's what we did to them. We OCV'd them, they're pelvic measured. I've seen some sell recently that were ultrasound sex pregnancies, and you got all these time AIs, and then we roll them out and we try to sell them. Well, the market's dictated that this is a $2,600 market. And based off my cost to keep last year and what UNL says it costs to keep a cow in the state of Nebraska, if I split the difference between those two and add that to the cost of what feeder heifers were a year ago, we'd have $2,500 in them. So doing all these other extra things isn't adding any value to these heifers. Now, what I find interesting is when we get into the second calving female, so like your 3, 4 year olds, they're selling for 9% more than these bred heifers. The market is sending a very strong signal that it does not care about the checklist of things that we have done to the bred heifers. It cares what those heifers have done, and that is that they have calved and bred back. That's all the market's really caring about. And some people think that, well, this is messed up. The heifer should be worth more. Listen, I'm sure it's been talked about on here earlier. If it hasn't, it's going to be now. But the average age of the cattle producers is getting older. And these baby boomers have made the market pretty much their entire lives for consumer goods or anything else. And they're still making the market on these heifers. And they don't want bred heifers. They want a cow that knows what she's doing. And what I think is kind of interesting, when Chris was talking about some of the things he was talking about, there are a lot of terms that they use in the real estate world, and I made a note of some of these. Got to find my page here. I'm not really that familiar with them, but they talk about the net present value, discounted cash flows, and then I've got the time value of money up here. Now, some people, I should probably back this up. We have been taught that you add a lot of value to these animals. You take a heifer, you breed her, you capture the appreciation value. That's what I'm trying to say. So capture the appreciation value. Well, if we have $2,500 in them and they're worth 2,600, I mean, we're doing that. We're capturing the appreciation value, but there is no margin in there. We're not making any money. So really, the bred heifer market is a return of the money, not a return on the money. And this is why I'm starting to refer to bred heifers as dead equity. And here's where I'm going to that. So if you run those calculations that I mentioned, the net present value, the discounted cash flow, what that would look like is, and this is where I think people have been taught wrong, is that if you invest $100,000 and your target is to make a 10% return, but you get that one lick that first year where you get a 30% return, the theory is you can take the next 2 years off. And then those other 2 years will average out. You'll still hit your 10% return over those 3 years, right? Because the 30% average across. Well, that's incorrect. And this is where I will confess, and I'll say one thing that's different between me and a lot of other sell-by traders is I trade very aggressively. And it's that time value money is the reason why. And so if we had that same $100,000 and we only got the 10% return the first year, and you reinvest that interest back in it, and we're doing that compounding thing, by the end of the 3 years, if you reinvested the interest, if the interest was paid out monthly and you reinvested it back in it, by the end of the 3 years, you would have 100 and be roughly about 135,000. See, I could use Chris's calculator right now. That'd help me out. But if the interest was paid yearly, you'd make about 133,000. Either way, I would much rather take the 10% interest yearly, reinvest it, and I would make more money at the end of those 3 years instead of taking that one lick at 30% right away that first year and taking the next 2 years off. And that's what a lot of people are trying to do with these bred heifers. That's why I'm calling this bred heifer market dead equity. Now, if we took those bred heifers and we would turn them as stockers. So if you bought these heifers in September and you ran them for 15 months before you sold them as breds, you could do 5 trades if you turned them as stockers every quarter. And if you made $70 a head profit turning them as stockers, you would have 31% growth over that 15-month period. And the funny thing is, if you took $70 a head over that 15-month period, and then you compare that back against these bred heifers, that'd be very comparable to selling a bred heifer for 28 to 2,900 bucks instead of selling them for 26. That's the time value of money. Now, I'm going to share a deal that come from Ogallala's market report last week, but they sold 5-weight steers, heavy 4-weights, light 5-weight steers for over 1,900 bucks. A couple days before, you couldn't get a short solid cow to touch 1,700. These 5-weight steers are now selling for more money than cows. And one of the buyers out there made a comment that somebody has to run these cows because we can't all be yearling operators. And he's not wrong. And sometimes people will send me emails when they read my Intel blog on Beef Magazine's website, and they think I'm throwing a lot of shade and hating on these bred heifers. And if we don't bring these bred heifers online, how are we going to have calves? Look, that's not lost on me. But when I write that blog on Fridays, I have to tell you what the market signals are. And right now, there haven't been any market signals to breed these heifers. Hopefully, maybe things will change now that we're seeing $1,900 5-weight, 4-weight steers. Maybe that'll get some people to start producing more of these calves. And the other thing, and Jared, you're in the Western states. I've never been out there to a sale barn, so I don't know if you guys see this, but I know we see it here in this part of the country. And now that we've had some snow and we've had some rain, we've had a little moisture this winter, we're going to find out how optimistic some of these producers are moving forward. And the market will be dictated by the guys that wear the seed corn hats. The guys that wear seed corn hats always outbid guys that wear cowboy hats. And a lot of these corn farmers aren't feeling too cocky. When I got out of bed this morning, I checked the grain markets and corn was $4.35. That's the best bid in the county today. Now that's getting a lot closer to $3 than it is $5. And, if them corn farmers ain't making big money doing that, then they're probably not going to come to town and spend money buying cattle. So that's just a few things to kind of think about on the bred heifers. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about cost and, way our costs are changing and whatnot. I used to always reduce things down to the ridiculous when people talk about how the cattle business is changing. And I laugh at that because years ago we used to drive them to a point and then we loaded them on a train and sold them by weight. So they were shipped on wheels and sold by weight. We do the same thing today. We ship them out on 2022 wheels and they're sold by weight. It's just that the truck is a lot different than a train. But with these costs changing the way that they are, I feel like the dynamic is changing. And this is probably getting into one of those adapt or die type situations. And right before I started speaking, Jared was kind of talking about that World War II generation. And I did have a talk with my grandmother. She grew up during the Depression as a young child. And I kind of realized some things. I knew her parents really well. They lived to be, over 100 years old. And, I kind of came along young, early in life from my parents. So I got to know them really well. And they always, hoarded things, always had extra clothes and extra food. And it dawned on me that, hey, they went without and they were never going to go without again. And last year, Jared talked about that. What is it, the four turnings or something? And we're coming into one, or we're due to come into one. So we could very well be going into a situation where the dynamic is changing. Now, here's why cost is important. And all the articles that have been written for decades of my lifetime was you reduce your cost and sell your product for more than you have in it. That's how you make a profit. Well, the market goes up half the time, it goes down half the time. So that isn't always going to work. So this bottom arrow down here, the fulcrum on this lever represents our cost. And if you're watching this, you've probably used a pry bar at some point in time in your life. So we know if we can keep that fulcrum over there by that load, we can get a better bite and we have more leverage. That would illustrate a low cost. So it'd be a low cost to keep on cows. It'd be a low cost to gain on calves. That cost is what is going to set up and dictate price relationships between animals. So as that fulcrum moves over here towards the left, over towards the effort side, that's going to start disqualifying a lot of cattle as undervalued, and then they would be overvalued to the animals that we're selling. So this is why we need to keep our costs down to open up more opportunities and create better price relationships. So cash flow is king. That's one thing. I can't remember what Chris's saying is, but Dave Ramsey always talks about cash is king. Yeah, cash flow is king. And the best investments on earth are those that generate positive cash flow. So like I was talking about trading those stocker heifers instead of making the bred heifers. And really, when we go back through and I talk to all these producers that I've been on the phone with, they were always so close. If there'd have just been a little more, or if I could have had one more turn, or if there was one more group of cattle, I wouldn't have been in that situation. It's a cash flow problem. And every one of them is like, yeah, you look at the big iron auctions and the price of cattle. I mean, everything went up. Price of machinery's gone up, price of cattle's gone up, but they're going out of business now. They just needed that little extra bit of cash flow to make it through. Now here's a 10-year feeder chart. And, you look over here on the left side, we probably all remember that crash of 2015. Jared mentioned the housing bubble, back in 2007, 8. Plug your ears, Jared, but I love these kind of bear markets. Those hard ski slopes, they're a lot of fun for a sell-by trader because just like I started with earlier, even though my net worth is going to go down because most of my net worth until the last couple years is because I own land now, I own real estate now. But my net worth was tied very heavily to cattle. So when the cattle market tanked, my balance sheet looked like a mess. But I loved it because with sell by marketing and utilizing the relationships, I can turn on these down markets like this 2015 over here on the left-hand side of the screen, and I can cash flow like crazy because not every weight and not every type of animal drops at the same rate. Some examples from the cattle markets here the last couple of weeks, some of the lightweight cattle were down $20. The heavyweight feeders were down 8. Not all of them dropped at the same rate. So that sets up some kind of volatility where cattle traders can do some trading. And I should say this, when I say trading cattle, I'm not talking about buy them in one sale barn on Monday and sell them in another one on Thursday. That's cattle sneaking. I'm talking about running a program, weaning them, vaccinating them, doing those kind of things, calving the cows out, reselling them as pairs, whatever it might be. But as you look at this chart, you can see it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. 2020, we all remember the COVID situation. I did some really wonderful trades in COVID. I share some of those examples in my marketing schools, but that was a government made dip right there. That didn't have anything to do with the market. A healthy market will trade up and down in a general upward direction. And so that brings us over here to the right-hand side of the slide. And so that would show a healthy market. Now, the thing that I'm kind of wondering about, and a lot of these young guys that are fairly new to the cattle business is, okay, is this starting to look a lot like 2014? I don't know. I mean, we're going to find out in the next couple of years. But I've had a lot of conversations with these young cattle producers that tell me I can't go through another 2015 again. Well, you better learn how to start doing some sell by trading so you can learn how to take advantage of some of these relationships. Now, I use these slides, and these are from cows. These are cow sales. And don't worry about anything I got over here where I label them as pair 6 and heifer 1. And don't worry so much about the prices. And don't try to mimic anything that I'm doing here in these slides, because this will take me a while to explain the math and everything that's going on behind here. But what I want you to kind of grasp is these red and green numbers over here on the right. And this is the difference in their actual values and their intrinsic values. And so right here, you can see these red and green numbers from Kearney, Nebraska, and that was the Thanksgiving sale in 2023. These are out of Manhattan, Kansas in May of 23. And so you can see how those green and red numbers changed, and they've gotten actually smaller and even further below in the red. And then we got March of 23. So you can see they expanded. In fact, the only one that was below was that -11. So, I mean, we're really getting into some positive territory here. And then this is Kingsville, Missouri from a year ago. And if you remember that very first slide I had on there, this slide from a year ago looks a lot different from the slide just a couple months ago. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is these value differences in these cows fluctuate, and they're probably even more volatile than the feeder market. The University of Missouri Extension released their forecasted cow-calf budget for the year 2024, and they think that it's going to cost $1,700 to keep a cow in the state of Missouri this year. And the state of Missouri selling $1,300 calves. So we've got a lot of ground to make up. If you're gonna be in this cow-calf business, I would highly suggest you've got to learn how to market some of these cows and capitalize on this. And when we learn how to actually compare one cow to another cow and do some of those trades, there could be more profit in marketing cows than there ever was in calves. So you go right back to what that cattle buyer from Ogallala said: we can't all be yearling operators. Well, if we would learn how to market cows, we could do a very good job as cow-calf operators. So I guess, yep, I had another slide in there. And then I don't really want to go into this one. This is my end slide, but how do I switch it back?
Just find the stop share, wherever that is.
I'm not finding it.
See that all along I had the ability to take away your co-presenter privilege.
There you go. See, you had me feeling special right here till the end. So I'm going to share this story. This guy come through my marketing school earlier this year, and he's from north central Kansas. And I mean, the drought, was pretty rough. And you get back into April, May of the year, we were reducing herds. In fact, even right up till the 4th of July, our local sale barns will go to a summer schedule. but they did not go to that summer schedule. They stayed selling cattle every week instead of every other week, just because we're liquidating so many cows and pairs. And, you've got full grown men standing there at the loadout unloading their cows crying. I mean, it was one of those kind of years for us here. And anyway, this guy'd come through my marketing school, and I teach about the relationships and different trades from stalker to stalker and cow to cow and stalkers to cows and back again. And he went home and he's going to call his cows. And some people, will talk about you liquidate the cows, you take some time off, wait till it rains again, and then you can restock. Well, sell by marketing is head for head. And I really do that. And here's the thing to understand about sell by marketing, I should make clear in case people on here aren't familiar with it. Your exposure to risk is the time between the sell and the buy. And that's why we really kind of want to get those cattle replaced. So that way the market doesn't have time to do anything screwy with us. So my suggestion is if you're going to liquidate those cows, we'd liquidate deeper. And so what we're trying to do is liquidate weight. So we're going to sell these 1,300-pound cows, and we're going to buy these, 4 or 5 weight calves, and we'll graze them. So we can still go head for head, but we still get the same weight reduction, which means we'll have to sell more of the cows. We got to cull deeper into the herd. And he did that, as painful as it was. And then, I don't know, by the grace of God or whatever you want to call it this year, but the feeder market took off, after, what was it, about June, it skyrocketed. And he sold these cattle coming off grass. And so this would be kind of that August, early September timeframe where we're still kind of in that summer slump as far as the bred cow market goes. And so he sold those stalkers coming off grass, bought back bred females. So he made a really good trade going from cows to stalkers. He made a great trade going from stalkers back into cows. And I mean, he made a really great trade going from stalkers to cows. Now, here's the thing. The things that you do today set up the opportunities for tomorrow. And one thing, being in the part of the country that we live in and the corn paradigm being very strong, cows are something you do around corn planting is how it works here. He absolutely hates fall calving cows. But he bought some fall calving cows, calved them, resold them as pairs, and he almost doubled his money reselling those pairs. And those pairs were so overvalued, he could go back in the market, buy anything he wanted. He had the most overvalued sell. And, I'm sure he's probably going to buy back some spring calving cows. I don't know what he replaced them with. And another one, I got a text message from a guy in Western Nebraska. He was in the same class you were in, Jared. Based off what the market was showing us the first week of the year, he decided he better hurry up and sell some of his stalker cattle. And of course, then we get hit with this blizzard and these frigid temperatures, and the weather affected those calves in a bad way. And the shrink was a lot higher on those calves than he'd anticipated, which then drove his cost of gain up because he didn't have the weight to sell that he thought he was going to have to sell. And so he goes home, he gets on the internet, looks up some market reports, and he found a geographical spread where he could actually do a leapfrog trade where he could buy heavier cattle out of a different state, have them delivered to his place, and still make $50 a head. So even though what he thought he was going to do isn't what ended up happening, because sometimes we get unpleasant surprises, he still made it work. And so that's kind of when Jared and I were talking the other day. The math way is the pathway. And we have these, and I know you're going to talk about this. You talked about it today, and you'll talk about it the next 2 days, is paradigms. And we see this all the time with people that come through the schools. They look at the math, they look at what the market tells them to do right now, and it says, buy these calves. These calves are really undervalued. And they're like, well, if I buy those calves, they won't hit the board at this month. And see how they went right back to that old paradigm? Don't worry about it. When the market will come back around, eventually those cattle will be overvalued. It may not be overvalued at the time that you want them to be overvalued. And here's the thing about sell by marketing is you don't get to pick the date. And sometimes you don't get to pick the weight. If you buy some cattle in April and they become overvalued in June or July, a lot of people here will refuse to sell them because they're on grass and I got enough grass and the lease says I can be there till September, so I'm not selling them. And the market might say, fine, if you don't want to bring them now, good luck to you, but we're going on without you. So if we're supposed to be an industry of cowboys, let's go play cowboy. Let's gather those cattle up. Let's get them sold, get them replaced with something else that's undervalued. And that grass isn't going to go anywhere. It'll be there. You can get some other animals bought and get them turned back out. But I don't know. Can you go back to that slide, Jared? That had my that had all my contact information on there. And if you will indulge me, I got one more slide behind that one. There, are you guys seeing that? No, that's on my screen, isn't it? Well, I'm not getting it to share, Jared. See, Jared took my power away. Now he really took it all away. Can't even pull my slides back up.
Okay, sorry about that. I was muted there. So
That's all right.
you'll have to go to more or look down at the bottom and share screen and see if you can find that. I have to go back to. But what do you guys think? Is this making sense? Sell by marketing. I asked in the chat how many people have been through Doug's school. I know the Downings have, know them firsthand. A few other people had said that they had. If anybody's brave and wants to share their personal experience or testimonial from the school, I've been talking a lot. We'd be glad to unmute you. Just either raise your virtual hand or send me a message in the chat if you've been to Doug's school and can kind of share. Yeah, Keene, great school. Eric, do you want to share your experience while Doug's figuring out? Again, it should be there kind of at the bottom, I think. Doug, are you seeing it?
There, you got it?
Yeah, we're seeing it now. Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. So there's all my contact information, my phone number, email address, and then I write the Intel blog where I talk about sell by marketing on Beef Magazine's website every Friday. And then we got our website right there. This picture is my daughter. I think she was maybe third grade at about this time. And for her college education, or I don't know, future planning, if she doesn't go to college, we have her, she has her own group of cattle. So this is when she was getting her very first check with her name on it, cattle that were sold with her brand. And she turns 13 on Friday, and she's just a few head shy of having her own load lot. So on this next trade, she will have a pot load of her own cattle. And that's all been made possible just through doing sell by marketing. I don't invest in, ESAs or 529s. We've just done it right here, basically with all cattle. And if there's one big parenting mistake that I probably made, she's got her X paradigm. For those of you that have been through the school, that's the existing paradigm that we have. She thinks if you need money, you just go to the sale bar. And now I'm kind of having to try to teach her, like, well, there's a little bit more to it. You got to be intentional. It's just not that easy. You go to the sale barn and sell this group and buy another one. So Jared, the other day when we did that Facebook Live or whatever, you asked me real quickly about the mindset and I shut you down. This morning I went into town to get parts. We've got a lot of cold weather problems going on here, so I had to go into town. And sometimes when I have a bad day, I go drive by this place. And this is the best, worst job that I ever had. And I tell you, every time I had to put that uniform on and go in that back door and that time card with my name on it, hit that time clock, I felt like a piece of my soul died. I don't care that we're 20 below. I don't care that I got machinery problems. I don't care that my wife had to drop me off a mile and a half away from the cattle pens and I had to walk through the snow drifts to get to the place to feed cattle for the last 3 days. I wasn't clocking into that place. So again, I mean, that's all thanks to sell by marketing. And right there for me, that's all it takes for me to even just have a positive attitude in everything that we're going through. So that's kind of my little mindset piece for you, Jared.
Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. That is a powerful story. That's tapping into your why and your purpose. And yeah, I felt that. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, everybody, yeah, anybody has a quick question for Doug? We've got a little bit of time. I mean, our time's pretty much up, but this will be the end. Well, let's see, before we end here, I just want to go ahead and redirect the presenters that have been on here today. I mean, they've been awesome, and thank you, including you, Doug. Thank you so much for the time, the preparation. That started well beyond when I asked you to speak. I mean, you've been preparing for your whole life. We appreciate the influence that you're having in the cattle market, or the cattle industry, the livestock industry, the regenerative agriculture industry, and even though you know, you might see some of his methodologies may be different than yours, put it in your context, and so your last slide again, Doug. I guess somebody's looking for that if you want to share screen again. There's always that, you know, we said forget everything that you've learned, right? At the beginning. There's always that, yeah, that works in Nebraska, but that'll never work in Arizona, Nevada, wherever you put it. How would you respond to that, Doug?
I've had people from other continents fly to the States to come to these schools, and sell by marketing doesn't recognize state lines, it doesn't recognize borders, it doesn't even recognize oceans. It only recognizes relationships. In fact, you know, I mentioned this in one of the Intel blogs I wrote earlier this year. If you think back to that 10-year cattle chart that I had with the up and down blue line, sell by marketing's never had a bubble. It's never had a bubble burst. You know, I've spent a lot of time this last year studying J.C. Penney. You know, he was doing that. He was doing sell by marketing in his stores over 100 years ago. Sam Walton copied it in the Walmart deal. They call it vendor management inventory. They don't call it sell by marketing. They call it VMI. I mean, it's been around for over a century, and the only reason something lasts that long is because it works.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, what do you have more control over, the market or the way you market?
And then there was, it's hard for me to watch the chat while we're going, but I did see one question pop up about how much time I spend in sale barns. You don't have to spend a lot of time. I do. It's what I like to do. It's where I like to be. But the one thing I tell people that come through my schools is I think you probably ought to pay attention to your local market, like look at your local sale barns around your area, which, you know, Jared, I know it's different. You told me there's only two in your state, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I
three
mean, it's a
around.
lot more difficult there, but you know, I do a lot of this, and because I teach schools and the Intel blog and everything, I'm looking at sales every day. And right now with the snowstorm and everything being shut down, I mean, they're even shutting sales down in Tennessee and Kentucky, and you know, I'm kind of going through withdrawals. But the one thing I tell people to go through my schools is you ought to look at your local market at least once a week, and there's really no reason not to with USDA market reports, sale barn websites, and that kind of deal. Now, one thing I'll caution you on, Facebook is not the place to get market information. And sometimes, when I talk about the bred heifer market isn't very good, somebody will say, yeah, but so-and-so showed on his Facebook page they had these $3,000 bred heifers. That was a gate cut of 8 head. That doesn't really test the market because we sold maybe 30 of them at 2,800 to 3,000. We sold 40 of them at 2,800, and then it was a 2,000 to $2,600 market. That's where the other 500 sold.
Yeah, very good. So a little bit about the school, Doug, and how you get registered for that. For those that want to take the next step.
Yeah, go to my
And that.
website if I can still pull that up. I am not good at sharing, even though we've done that I don't know how many times today.
Yeah, I know. It's I struggle with it too. That's why I've got help in the back room.
Anyway, go to mrcattlemaster.com
Yeah.
and there's a marketing school page that you can get registered for there. And so what we do is you print off, there's a form, fill it out with your information on it, mail it to me with a tuition check. The February school that we got coming up is more than sold out. And we've got a school coming up in April. And we will announce other schools probably for fall and next winter later, but we do not plan on doing one this summer like we have been. We need a little family time.
Yeah, and that's 50 attendees, is that right? 40 or 50?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
How many attendees in the school?
We try to limit it to 40.
Yeah.
But I think the one you were at had 50, and I know we've got well over 40 for the February school, and we haven't had mail here for 7 days, and I've got a stack of them over there now today, about an inch deep.
Okay.
Or so. Yeah, that's I'm hoping they're for the April school. Or
Okay.
February is going to be huge.
Yeah, you might still be snowed in.
Oh, don't say that. You know what, Jared? I'm gonna be dead honest with you. Come Friday, I'm crawling into my underground bunker in the backyard, and I'm shutting the door for the next 7 years because on Friday we're gonna have a teenager in the house.
Oh no! Oh no!
So I don't care if it snows anymore.
Right on.
No, we're
Okay.
looking forward to it.
Yeah, they're not so bad. Well, thank you, Doug. It's been great. I encourage you to go to the school. Yeah, if you're just starting out, what a great way to go and learn these principles. I mean, pay a little tuition, learn from somebody who's in the trenches every day. It's not theory for Doug. He's doing it, and more than willing to mentor and help you along the way as you go to the school, and then questions come up and things. That's been super valuable as well.